real reason the WWE Network is gold is because you don't have to sit through shit to get to the good stuff. DVDs made that better, sure, but I'm old enough to remember a time where VHS tapes were all the rage, and you had to fast forward through any guff before reaching the match you wanted to see. This is a first world problem, yes, but it was still rubbish, made even worse when an entire pay-per-view was gubbins apart from one contest. Because of modern technology though, there's no such thing as a bad card anymore. You can ignore the whole thing entirely if you want and just digest whatever it is you're looking for. Want to see the Montreal Screwjob without sitting through Ken Shamrock, Ahmed Johnson and the Legion of Doom versus The Nation? 2018 lets you do that. Thank goodness. I'm Simon from What Culture and this is 10 great wrestling matches hidden on terrible pay-per-views. Number 10, Kurt Angle versus The Rock versus Triple H versus The Undertaker versus Stone Cold Steve Austin versus Rikishi at WWF Armageddon 2000. Armageddon 2000 was the definition of a one-match show, but here's the thing. That one match is so good it saves the entire event. I love it. Main evented by a ridiculously entertaining Hell in a Cell fight between champion Kurt Angle, The Rock, Triple H, The Undertaker, Stone Cold Steve Austin and Rikishi. Everything before this was questionable at best. The roster of 2000 was massively talented, but the most talented guys were all limited in terms of what they were given. Chris Jericho and Kane, for example, had to feud over the fact Y2J accidentally spilled coffee over the big red machine. Right. Screw that though, because again, think what came at the end of this. An ultra-violent whirlwind. There's so much going on that the cameramen portray realism at times, accidentally shooting a wrestler just waiting to break up a pinfall. None of this matters, however, because the entertainment here is of the highest order. It also has a ludicrously hot and loud crowd as no one in attendance knows who's to cheer for. On top of that, it even worked in some glorious 2000-era storytelling. Vince McMahon, who did not want his 6 biggest stars destroyed in a match ordered by Commissioner Mick Foley, attempts to tear the cell down altogether. This of course enables all 6 participants to brawl around the staging area, so much so, JR almost collapses on commentary. It also has that spot with Rikishi, but who cares? It's bloody, breathless, brilliant. Number 9, Bret Hart versus the British Bulldog at WWF In Your House Seasons Beatings. The horrendous name of the show aside, most of this card was also rubbish. Highlighting how far gone WWE was in 1995, this also revolved around King Mabel, who was far from kicking ass at the time, and it summed up a problem in general. Tall big dudes were the order of the day during the mid-90s, and that meant a lot of matches just weren't very good. Diesel and Henry O. Godwin also fell into this category, and by the time Bret Hart and the Bulldog arrived, a lot of the fans were almost asleep. The Hitman and Davey Boy fought this head-on, however, with a match full of character development and almost a blueprint to what the Attitude Era would become. Superior in content to their much-loved SummerSlam 1992 original, Hart and Bulldog roused the audience with technicality and physicality. Bulldog also showed his heel chops aplenty as he pretty much murdered Bret as the pace kept increasing almost on cue. This allowed the drama to become almost too much as blood poured down Bret's face, and the ending which saw Hart roll his brother-in-law up for the narrow win fit in perfectly. How they shook hands and teamed up a couple of years after this is anybody's guess, because in the real world such a war would have left both men broken messes. Number 8, Dolph Ziggler vs Daniel Bryan at WWE Bragging Rights 2010. Bragging rights in 2010 made no sense because aside from actual bragging rights, there was nothing on the line. No stakes, no nada. Which was even worse because at this point Raw and SmackDown were basically won anyway. It was a waste of time. However, you wouldn't have cared if you tuned in at the very start because you were greeted by a back and forth 15-minute affair between Daniel Bryan and Dolph Ziggler in which both men were positioned as equals. It was contested under a thrilling novelty too, and given this was the era between Shawn Michaels' retirement and indie wrestlers invading the WWE, well, Daniel Bryan stood out like a wonderful sore thumb. What's even nicer is that here we are 8 years on, it's still good. Even Michael Cole is clearly impressed despite his ongoing feud with the former American Dragon. Just remember that as soon as this is over, you turn off bragging rights. Number 7, Ric Flair vs Vader at WCW at Starrcade 1993. Starrcade was WCW's biggest event of the calendar, and the 1993 iteration was similar to WrestleMania 13 in that it was a one-match show, and that sucks. It's a shame too, because on paper this actually looked good. The execution was a different story. The television TV title draw between Steven Regal and Ricky Steamboat was okay at best, and Steve Austin vs Dustin Rhodes, then two of wrestling's foremost emerging stars, was about the same. The tag team title match pitting Sting and Hawk against the Nasty Boys was just too long at almost 30 minutes. You'd have thought Ric Flair against Vader would have smashed it though, and thankfully, they did, even if it did represent a curious clash of styles. Flair is best remembered as a heel, but he's also a fantastic babyface and one with an astounding ability to yield sympathy, and that's what the Nature Boy did here. Ric's first-rate body language makes you care as much as you need, while he also gets pummeled by Vader, which protected him at the same time. In many ways, it's like Pro Wrestling 101 performed by two proper pros. Number 6, Bray Wyatt vs Daniel Bryan at the WWE Royal Rumble 2014. The Royal Rumble 2014 is remembered for one thing and one thing only. Fans went livid that Daniel Bryan wasn't number 30, hounded Rey Mysterio because he was, and then got mad that Batista won the whole thing. Thankfully, the first match on the card featuring our friend Daniel rocked. Happening at a time where Bray Wyatt was still booked as if he was some supernatural, terrifying threat, he dominated Bryan in the early going in a way that actually did back his character up. And when did we last say that? Probably back in January 2014 if we're honest. The thing went 21 minutes and 29 seconds and even nabbed the spot of the night where Wyatt countered Bryan's dive into a sickening guardrail assisted Sister Abigail. This is even more impressive given that Kofi Kingston had his Rumble madness later in the night. Good in its own right, it's also a sad look at how great Wyatt could have been before he's run into the ground. Like salt. And I don't even know what that means. Number 5, Chris Benoit vs DDP at WCW Road Wild 1999. Every match that happened in Road Wild history should have been rubbish. Basically one big love-in for Eric Bischoff and his motorbike fandom. The crowd was a bunch of bikers who knew nothing about wrestling and didn't even pay to be there. Not exactly the recipe for success. Even the build for the 1999 version sounded bad. DDP had besmirched Chris Benoit's apparently easy mother as a means of kicking off things. And that just sounds crap. But it wasn't. The two contested a gripping match which didn't just rely on outside brawling to engage a passive audience. DDP even unhooked the referee's belt to whip Benoit in a move that stirred the would-be fans in attendance up no end. Benoit was his usual stiff self as well, and the pair going at it on that level resulted in a far better war than anyone expected, and the only thing worth seeing just a couple of years before WCW was dead. It's not hard to see why that happened if you do stick around and watch the entire thing. Number 4, John Cena vs Sabu at WWE Vengeance 2006. Vengeance 2006 sucked. The opener between Randy Orton and Kurt Angle, who badly needed rest, delivered far less than what we hoped, whereas Ric Flair and Mick Foley wrestled what must be the shortest ever 2 out of 3 Falls match at just 6 minutes and 57 seconds. The main event was passable in terms of content, but the depressing waste of the Spirit Squad's talents make it less than great today. We also got Kane vs Kane, and given that didn't work at SummerSlam 94 with The Undertaker, there was no point in trying again 12 years later. Thankfully, John Cena vs Sabu was great. How, I don't know, but from the moment the ECW Lumberjacks whooped Cena's ass to give him a reason to be on his back to the sheer amount of action that followed was a treat. Even the finish managed to be dramatic. As Cena hoisted Sabu for the match-winning AA, he noticed a table out of the corner of his eye and threw his rival through it. Because of course he did. If nothing else, getting to see these two wrestle to begin with was intriguing enough, but they more than made it work. Number 3, the Usos vs Luke Harper and Eric Rowan at WWE Battleground 2014. This pay-per-view was nothing. It was meant to set up Roman Reigns vs John Cena as a match for the ages, but unfortunately was met by apathy because it was Reigns and Cena. You know the deal by now. It's like fighting a tiger in its own cage, it never ends well. The first match, however, was brilliant. A very well put together 2 out of 3 Falls affair. It didn't even matter it followed the usual routine with the good guys going behind early on. The sheer quality put on by everyone involved was of such a high standard, it's one of the best non-NXT tag bouts in recent memory on WWE TV. Like Bryan vs Wyatt, part of its appeal lied in how good and terrifying Luke Harper looked. Eric Rowan also pulled his weight, but seeing the Usos baffled in how to stop his power game, which also intensified that he started hitting suicide dives, worked like a charm. The question was simple. How do you stop this guy? It also kind of reminds you why WWE didn't want to turn the Usos long after everyone was ready. When they were over as babyfaces, the crowd loved them, and they did a great job playing up to that as well. Number 2, Brock Lesnar vs John Cena vs Seth Rollins at the WWE Royal Rumble 2015. Falling foul to yet more disdain from the WWE Universe when Roman Reigns won the Rumble despite everybody asking for someone else, the whole event may have been nothing more than a footnote if it wasn't for Brock Lesnar, Seth Rollins and John Cena putting on a truly brilliant triple threat match with the WWE title on the line. This was never going to be bad given who was in it, but the levels it achieved were way above what anybody assumed, with Lesnar especially coming across like a monster. He treated his opponents like they were jobbers. The decision to eliminate him via Rollins' spectacular elbow drop through the table was smart too. It prolonged the action and gave Cena and Rollins freedom to go nuts. Then when Brock rose from his grave, my word, 10 out of 10. It's sometimes difficult to suspend disbelief during triple threats, but all three men made sure we bought in like the idiots we are. Number 1, Mike Awesome vs Masato Tanaka at ECW November to Remember 1999. 1999 ECW was not the force it used to be. Much of their best talent had left, and their style had been taken and been made more popular by the WWE. Even with that, November to Remember was well on its way to becoming a stellar event, but the feature matches did disappoint. While we forget about it today, the main event does mean everything at a pay-per-view because if it doesn't deliver, it compromises the quality overall. To get there though, you need your mid-card bouts to build to that, and that's where Mike Awesome and Masato Tanaka rocked in to save the show. A trademark chair and table festival during the late 90s, their commitment to the violence was borderline dangerous. The sheer decibel level they achieved with chair shots takes whatever you think you know about wrestling and puts it to bed. Their matches aren't easy to watch in 2018 because they're so nasty, but for better or worse, you can't help but be taken in by this. They had a plan, and they smashed that plan out the water.